Well, today I am joined by Dave Liu, who is a Wall Street veteran and who worked his way up to managing director at one of the top investment banks in the world. Dave is a 30-year veteran spending time in both Wall Street and Silicon Valley. He's raised over $15 billion for hundreds of companies. He's created multiple startups and had multiple billion-dollar exits, which we're going to talk about. He also has an amazing book. You may have heard of it, The Way of the Wall Street Warrior, which it sold almost 10,000 copies in the first 2 weeks of launch and reached the top 10 Amazon bestseller list in the business finance category. Dave has founded 4 companies in asset management, media, strategic consulting, and technology. And he has achieved 3 unicorns with over $1 billion in value. Dave, thanks so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. My curiosity is aroused. So, with those 3 unicorns, are you open to sharing those companies?
Yeah, so they're companies that I invested in, and I'm a shareholder, and have done very well. The largest is a company called Internet Brands WebMD. You might have heard of our largest property, which is WebMD. It's the
Yeah.
largest site for health-related information. And there was some news that came out actually just a couple of months ago that the company had raised another round of capital because it's still private at a rumored valuation of over 14 billion. So that's obviously a unicorn, if you consider a unicorn a billion or more. Um, and interestingly, I was the company's advisor and took it public when I was a banker at Jefferies. And then I maintained a very good relationship with them even after I retired from Wall Street, and continue to be a close friend and helper of the company. And I've been very proud of what they've been able to achieve over the last couple of years. And then another one is a company called Vobal. It's a video software company. They encrypt video, and they actually allow for the Hollywood studios to track all of their content being syndicated all over the internet. And this is a company that actually I had helped the CEO write the original business plan. He actually came to my office and showed me a PowerPoint and a demo of his product. And he'll admit this. He told me I had this idea for what I want to do with this, and I'm a very direct person, as you'll get to see. And I said I don't think that's a good idea. And so I kind of steered him in a different direction to use this technology to do essentially video fingerprinting. And it was a long slog, many years of near death experiences, trouble raising capital, trying to wait for the Hollywood studios to decide to buy our software. But ultimately, we were able to survive that, and the company went public and reached a market cap of around $2 billion. And with the whole correction in the tech market, the company's still hovering around a billion, just above $1 billion in market cap. So that's another
Okay.
company that I was involved with really right at the beginning. And there are several others. There's actually not just three, but I was a seed investor in a company called Figs, which is a company that is selling medical apparel online. So they sell scrubs, and it went public and actually reached a peak of around, I think, around $8 billion. And another company where I'm the vice chairman, a company called Mobility Wear. We're
Mhm.
one of the largest hyper casual online gaming companies in the world. Um, we count many of the women of America as our customers. We've had hundreds and hundreds of millions of downloads, and our top games are the hyper casual games that you like to play while waiting in line at the DMV. So games like solitaire, games like jigsaw puzzle, games like bubble shooter. These are all our games, and so that's another company that I'm very proud to have been involved with for almost a decade now. So
Wow.
those are just a handful of the companies that I've been involved with as a shareholder and as an investor.
Okay. Cool. So I want to address the elephant in the room, at least for me. Um, it's not every day that you meet somebody who went from Wall Street to tech investor or investor. in the way that you have, and kind of rose to the top in both of those worlds as you kind of look back at your journey. Well, could you give a little bit of insight into, you know, what took you from there to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I can give you a little bit of my upbringing, because that actually has a huge influence over how I ended up where I am today. So
Sure.
I was born in the U.S., but I grew up in Asia, and I was actually born with a whole bunch of challenges. I was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate. And what that is essentially there was a whole bunch of stuff in my skull that wasn't fused. So when I was born with a big hole in the center of my face. Um, and fast forward over a 16, 17-year journey, I underwent around 11 craniofacial surgeries, and spent pretty much my entire childhood in treatment or at the hospital. So dealing with all this kind of stuff. Now, as you can imagine, that's a pretty adverse upbringing. But what it did was it really taught me how to be independent. It taught me how to have a thick skin. It taught me how to really stick to my guns. And if there's something that I wanted to do or achieve, I wouldn't let anything stop me.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for the life that I've been given, and the life we're all given. And I didn't want to necessarily squander that. And so that was what really toughened my exterior. And I think when I was growing up, I thought of it as a curse. But in hindsight, it was actually a blessing, because what I have found, fast forward into my career on Wall Street, in Silicon Valley, and now a little bit in Hollywood, is that when you're in these industries that are highly competitive, are highly compensated, one of the things that you really need to develop is a thick exterior. You need to develop thick skin, because there's going to be a lot of challenges as you're going up that corporate ladder, and other people want to eat your lunch. Um,
Yeah.
and I think the fact that I had that upbringing really helped me, became kind of my superpower in helping me get through all that. And so that was kind of the crucible, if you will, that I was trained in. And then I had some additional challenges. My family was in a very tough financial position. So when I was actually in college, we were not directly below poverty, but we're pretty close. And so I had to self fund my whole education, and I needed to make sure that I could find a job, something that I could do with my life that would allow me to, one, pay back $100,000 of debt that I had borrowed to go to undergraduate, and then two, provide money that I could send home to support my mom, because my father had largely abandoned us at that point.
Wow.
So what I discovered was that I had a lot of the requisite tools that would make me a really good junior person on Wall Street. And so I decided that would be a good career for me to start my career in, something I was good at, and I could make a lot of money relatively quickly. And so I went into that industry. I learned the rules of the game. I learned how to move up that corporate ladder. And I was one of the fastest promoted, if not the fastest promoted in my firm's history at almost every level, and got to the managing director, co-head level in my early 30s, which is very young for Wall Street. Um,
Yeah.
and then I'm trying to kind of answer your question at a high level. Um, what I learned was that I really wanted to have a more balanced life, and I wanted to have a family. But I didn't want to be a cliche dad. I didn't want to be that dad who's never home, that one day, you come home, your kids don't know who you are, and the wife is hanging out with the gardener, right? I didn't want
Right.
that. Uh, and so I decided that in my early 40s, essentially when I turned 40, I wanted to transition out of Wall Street. And I started to
Hmm.
think about what else could I do? And what I learned was that there's some universal skills that are imminently transferable in any industry, regardless of what industry you're working in. And the number one superpower that kind of gets you to the top in Wall Street, particularly on the investment banking side, which was the side I was at. This is the group that is responsible for doing like M&A deals, selling companies. The group that helps raise capital. The group that takes companies public and does IPOs. One of the key superpowers in that arena is salesmanship. So the ability to sell a company, the ability to sell investors on an idea, the ability to sell a board on a strategic direction that you want the company to go to. And that was a skill that I had honed over, a decade, a dozen years to get to the top. And
Yeah.
that skill set is very, very valuable, regardless of what industry you're in. And I found that it was actually very valuable in Silicon Valley. It was very valuable in technology because what it allowed me to do was it allowed me to raise capital for my crazy ideas. An idea that I might sketch out on a napkin and then need to raise angel money or need to raise institutional money. That salesmanship, that ability to raise capital and tell a story was super valuable. It was also really valuable when I was trying to figure out how to recruit people to this crazy idea that I was trying to develop. And as you know, entrepreneurship, one of the core tenets of entrepreneurship is you got to always be selling. You might be selling to an investor to invest in your company. You might be selling to a hotshot recruit to join your company. You might be selling to a customer to buy your product. You might be selling to a partner to do some business development deal with you, but you're always selling. And that was something that I had honed in my career on Wall Street that allowed me to make the transition into Silicon Valley, I think, a little bit more easily than others would.
Yeah. And often, we're selling most to our own team, and I think even more so to ourselves on where we are, on where we're moving, and why we do the things that we do. So that's another important point not to be lost either. Um, and so, in addition to learning sales and how to sell, psychology is another big thing that I know has been central to your ascent and to that transition. Talk a little bit about how to use psychology to achieve your corporate goals and to really propel one's career.
Sure. So, a lot of what I'm going to share with you about this topic, I've actually developed in hindsight. So, it's really come from meditating and reflecting back on my 30-year career and trying to figure out what were the characteristics, what were the things that really helped me a lot, and what frankly didn't help me a whole lot, right? And the reason why, obviously, I meditated on a lot of this stuff was they ended up being the kernels for the book that I ultimately wrote. And I wrote that book really for my two boys. I have two sons, and I wanted to be able to share with them some of the lessons that I had learned the hard way and make it a little easier for them. So I thought back and I looked back and I tried to think about, okay, what were some of those formative things that helped me? One of the things, ironically, was my birth difference, because when I had all those challenges, I had a lot of time to observe and study people, study human behavior, because, I was obese, I was teased, I didn't have a lot of friends. Frankly, I don't think I had any friends growing up. And so it gave me a lot of time to observe and figure out, okay, what is it about people? Like, why do they act the way they do? And then as I was going up the corporate ladder, despite having gone to two of the best business schools in the world, what I reflected on was like, I didn't learn anything in school that helped me in my corporate rise. And in
Right.
fact, when I look back on the type of content that you're impressed upon when you're in school is actually somewhat disserving, because what it does is they try to tell you that the world is a meritocracy. They try to tell you that the system is very fair and that if you're smart and you work hard, you're going to get to the top. And we all know that that's not the case. The world is not fair. The world has unwritten rules that you need to discover. And
Yeah.
I learned that the hard way as I was moving up Wall Street. And so when I reflect back on what were the things that really helped me, one of the key things was really trying to understand the motivations of people, trying to understand like what makes people tick. And if you look at the field of psychology, and in particular, some of the subsegments, things like cognitive science and behavioral science and cognitive bias, these are areas that have been studied really only in the last 50 years. And what they have found, and many of these areas have actually won Nobel Prizes, and there's a lot of best-selling books. If you go to any airport in America, you'll see these books on the shelf with titles like Thinking Fast and Slow, or Predictably Irrational, or Nudge. These books, what they essentially tell you is that people are not rational. Like, people
Hmm.
do not think rationally. And they're actually subject to biases, emotion, anchoring, all these things that really influence your behavior. And there's some that are now part of our general vernacular. Like we kind of now accept that, people are really very risk averse. We recognize that people have affinity bias. They tend to like people more that look like them, have the same gender, right? These are things that I think are now pretty well known. But what I realized was that I had actually used a lot of these somewhat inadvertently. I'd used a lot of these to my advantage as I was moving up the corporate ladder. And
Sure.
a part of it was I tried to always figure out what are the motivations of the people around me, my boss, my boss's boss, the people that work for me, my customers, my partners. What are their individual motivations? And what I determined was that if I could figure out what motivates them, then I could figure out how to incent them to do what I need them to do to help me. And so, a very, very specific one that I always tell people who are trying to rise in the corporate ladder is you've got to really understand what motivates your boss. And sometimes it's not obvious. I know it
Right.
wasn't obvious with me because when I started my career, I had no money. I needed to get money home, and I was hell bent on getting promoted really quickly. So if you work for me during my late 20s and early 30s, you pretty much knew how to motivate me. The way to do a great job was to help me make more money, help me rise the corporate ladder. But if you knew me in my 40s, you would not know how to manage me because at that point, it wasn't about money anymore. It was really about legacy. It was about work-life balance. It was about trying to create some mark. And
Yeah.
so over time, what you find is that people's motivations change.
Mhm.
And if you want to have them help you in whatever you want to do, whether you're starting a company or going up the corporate ladder, you need to understand those motivations so that you can think about how do I create incentives to help them help me. And I think that was fundamentally what really helped me a lot in my career and what I go into great depth in my book.
Yes. And so understanding why people work the way that they do, and furthermore, what people's end game or end goal is at the stage that they're in, and then how you can, I think, both serve them, but also leverage that intel and those relationships to help in your own ascent as well. Super, super critical. Are there any other tips or insights just into sort of your entrepreneurial ascent in addition to um, this this idea of psychology that you just shared that you feel like really contributed to what's brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, so there's one cardinal rule that I drives me constantly, and that actually has driven me throughout my career and even to this day. And it is be a stork, not a pigeon. Okay, so what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that if you're familiar with a stork, right, it's the bird that drops a baby, that delivers the value, right? And we all know what a pigeon is. Pigeons, they come in, they crap on everything, and then they disappear, right? And what I have found is that most people think that they're a stork, but they're really a pigeon. And I'll give you a good example, which is meetings. Okay. We've all been in these kind of meetings, right? We're in a meeting where somebody sets an agenda, maybe have an hour and somebody presents, they're presenting an idea, a project, some concept, right? And then inevitably what happens is that someone in the peanut gallery, and usually there are a lot of them, right? People in the group, they think that the way they add value is they point out all the problems with your idea. Well, I don't know if that works. I don't know if this works. Blah, 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 right? And let's face it, it's so much easier to point out the problems in something than to come up with solutions. And
Mhm.
then inevitably what happens is time runs out, right? And everyone bails.
Yeah.
And guess what? They're pigeons, right? They left, right? However, the people that add value, so the people that think about, okay, how do I advance this idea, right? How do I give suggestions, right? Those are the people that really advance the ball. They're the storks, right? And so I always let that drive my decision making, whether I'm raising money for a company, whether I'm trying to impress my boss, whether I'm trying to get a customer. And coupled with that is another major bias, which has gotten only worse over time, which is attentional bias. And that's just a fancy word for the fact that nobody has any attention anymore, right? And it's just getting worse. I kind
Mhm.
of joke that I call it goldfishitis because it's essentially because we now all have less attention than a goldfish. And so I think about coupling those two together. How do I always add value? How do I always be the stork, but at the same time be mindful of the fact that everyone has goldfishitis? Nobody's paying attention anymore. And so one of the things that I did as a junior person, and even as a senior person, whenever I have meetings, whenever I have a situation where I'm dealing with other people, is I think about how do I get to the point as fast as possible? How do
Yeah.
I get to the point, and how do I give them the solution, and then work backwards? Nobody wants war and peace to get to the ending, right? That save that for the movies. What people want is they want to know, why am I meeting with you, and how do I make this time I'm spending with you productive? How do I
Yeah.
make it such that when I have an interaction with you, whether you're my boss, whether you're a client, whether you're an investor, that they say to themselves after meeting with me, they say, like, you know what? That was a really good use of time. I'm going to meet with that guy again, because every time I meet with him, I learn something, and he gets to the point and he doesn't waste my time. Conversely, which, and you don't want this, is when they look at their watch and you're like, man, how do I get that half hour back? Wow, that was a
Right.
complete waste of time.
Right.
And I
Exactly.
don't think enough people think of it from that lens. But if you think of it from that lens as an entrepreneur, and you kind of hone that, I guarantee you'll find a lot more success than if you think of it conversely, and you aren't mindful of people's time, and you're not respectful of it, and you're not always delivering value, you're not always a stork.
Correct. You know, attention is our number one asset and our most valuable resource. It's not time. Time is very valuable, and money is also very valuable, but it's attention that is rising to the top as kind of that currency that everybody is after, and that everybody either implicitly or explicitly is working to gain control over, or to control yours. Um,
I mean, that's frankly
so
why money is valuable, right? Because money buys you time, right? And allows you the
exactly.
flexibility to spend more time on the things that you really care about, and less time on stuff that's just wasting your time.
Yep. Yep, exactly. So kind of going off the back of that then, you know, what are some of the things that you've discovered about leading a balanced and fulfilling life against the backdrop of all of this diminishing attention and digital clutter? Like, what are some of the things that you're doing to maintain that harmony?
Yeah, so I think of time as very precious, right? And then so I think of your our lives are in a journey, on a journey. And
Yeah.
what you don't want to do is you don't want to get distracted off of that journey, because distraction off that journey leads to unhappiness, leads to an unfulfilled life, and I think that can spiral out of control. And so one way that I counsel people on how to maintain their path on that journey is actually to use a framework that I'm a huge fan of, the Ikigai framework, the Japanese framework.
Love
And
it.
it sounds like you're familiar with it, but I find that constantly checking back on that framework really helps you determine whether you're on the right path. Like, am I still working on something that I'm good at, that I love, that a society needs, and last but not least, that society will pay for, right? If I'm still on that path where all those four criteria are satisfied, then I'm spending my time wisely. And if I'm not, then I always think about, okay, maybe I should be doing something else, right? Because I look at that Ikigai framework as, in many ways, like the four legs of a stool, right? Four legs of a table. If you don't have all four, it's not the end of the world, right? Obviously, you can't stand up if you only have two of the four. But if you have three of the four, where, I get paid really well, society values this, and I'm good at it, but I don't really love it, like I'm not really excited, you could probably do that for some time, just like a three-legged table could probably stand up for a little bit of time. But fundamentally, it's unstable. And so I think about, how do I maintain my peace of mind, my purpose in life, my work-life balance. I try to do if possible, like an annual check on my on those Ikigai questions, and I find it to be very, very settling. It really helps me center myself and figure out, okay, I'm on the right path or I'm not.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for anyone that's not familiar, with this framework. You can just go Google it. It's basically a way to kind of reframe or bring yourself back to meaning and ultimately purpose within your life by looking at all of those components that Dave was just alluding to. So definitely a big part of my life as well. Um, Dave, I do want to kind of transition the conversation here as we wrap up into your book. And look, we'll include links in the bio. We could provide all the numbers and go into that as well. But I want to kind of give you the floor, and I'm most interested on kind of your biggest learnings from, I guess, what led to the idea for this book, and then bringing it about in the way that you have.
Yeah. So the way this thing came about was I started to reflect upon all the things that helped me get to the top of corporate America. And you may or may not be aware of this, but there's a lot of research done by Harvard and others that shows that Asian Americans are actually the least likely ethnic group to get promoted in corporate America.
Mm.
And that's led to the moniker bamboo ceiling. So if you're familiar with, for women, there's a glass ceiling. There's a bamboo ceiling for Asian Americans in America. And there's a lot of reasons why that's happened. But what I found in reflecting upon my own career was that there wasn't a lot of content out there that actually helped people figure out, how do I break that bamboo ceiling? There's obvious things like, oh, you got to be more aggressive. You got to be more outspoken, right? Yeah. Okay. Got it. All right. I know that. But what do I do? And what I didn't want was, I didn't want my two boys, who are obviously Asian American, to have the same challenges that I see many Asian Americans have in this country. And
Sure.
so I started to write down in what I joke my manifesto. I started to write down in the manifesto all the things that I did in my career to get me ahead. You know, what were tactically some of the things I did when I was running a meeting? What were some of the things I did to fit in a group where it was primarily Caucasian men, right? What did I do to get promoted? What did I do to get paid more each year, right? So I started writing out all these different tactics, you know, kind of in a bullet point. These are the things I was doing. And then an author friend of mine called me during COVID and said, "Hey, what are you up to?" And I said, "Oh, I'm selling one of my companies, but I'm also working on this manuscript thing I've been working on for some time for my two boys." And he wanted to see a copy of it, and I sent it over to him. And after he looked at it, he said, "Hey, you know, I think this could be a book, and I think you owe it to the world to publish this, because there's a lot of people that feel that the system is rigged. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people that are underrepresented in corporate America that feel that there's some kind of ceiling, and I think this could help a lot of people." And so initially, I was like, I don't know," but I decided to put in the effort to write a book, because what it dawned on me was that this could be like a philanthropic project. This could be something where I could talk to people, share some of my ideas and thoughts with people that feel underrepresented. And then I could dedicate all the proceeds to charities that I care about,
Mm.
charities related to CLEFs, which I was born with, charities that are focused on helping uplift Asian Americans in this country. And so I finally decided to sit down and write almost 300 pages and draw a bunch of cartoons. There's a bunch of cartoons in the book. And I decided to get that done. And I'm so happy that I did it. It was published a little over a year now ago. And as you mentioned, you know, it's a bestseller, won a bunch of book awards, did really well financially. So I was able to donate a lot of money to a variety of charities that I care about. And it's been really rewarding just going around and talking to ERG groups, employee resource groups, to people of color, organizations, schools, and just share some of what I've learned during my career. And I found that there's a lot of resonance. I think a lot of people feel that the system is rigged against them, and they're looking for every little advantage that they can find. And I find it quite rewarding that I'm able to do that by sharing what I've learned the hard way.
Thank you for sharing that, and we'll include a link in the bio. I just added it to my Amazon cart as well, so I can't wait to dig in. Kind of just to my last question for you, true to the namesake of this show, you know, we talked about psychology, we talked about selling and the importance of that in kind of ascension in your career, balance and harmony. We talked about uh, philanthropy, excuse me, a little bit. What is one mental or business or financial model that is top of mind for you right now in terms of success moving forward personally in your life?
In terms of, maybe you can just give me a little more clarity on your question. In terms of what, how I decide where to spend my time or where do I invest my money, all the above. Like
Yes,
how?
all the above. Like, what's the one kind of model of thinking or being or even investing that you are thinking about most these days?
Yeah. So what I constantly think about is where the world will be, 10, 20 years from now.
Yeah.
I have the luxury of not having to deal with outside investors, with investing my own money. So I can be very, very long term. I can essentially be as long term as I feel I'll be alive.
Amazing.
And that gives me a huge amount of flexibility in terms of the kind of companies that I want to start, the kind of
Yep.
companies I want to invest in. And what really drives me over that period of time is what are the businesses that can either be sustainable through their brand or through their technology or through their product, and essentially can be monopolies or quasi monopolies.
Mhm.
It's very hard to be a monopoly in America because obviously you have the antitrust people, but there's a lot of businesses that are essentially monopolies, even though they're not defined that way. Um, and so when I look at some of the long-term public investments that I've made, I've made investments in companies like Amazon and Alphabet and Costco, businesses that I feel, okay, yeah, you can obviously go shop somewhere else, but like the convenience, the branding is so strong that nobody's
Yeah.
going to go anywhere else to, buy a pair of shoes or, do a query search. And it's not relegated just to tech. One investment that I think is just amazing is Hershey's, of all things. If you look at that stock price over the last, 30, 40 years, I mean, if there was a recession proof stock, it's that. And so when I think about that, it has a lot of the same characteristics, right? Where a lot of the confectioners going to buy their chocolate from. They can buy it from a lot of places, but Hershey's is, pretty well known and high quality, and people are going to keep eating chocolate. And so that's how I think about where I invest. And when I think about companies that I want to start, companies I want to be invested in, from a time standpoint, so companies that where I'm going to put my own sweat equity, I do think about it in the same way. Like, how do I build economies of scale, network effects,
Yep.
brand superiority in a relatively short amount of time, so that in a world where every company, every competitor is really only one click away, how do I build a quasi monopoly with that business model? And that's much harder, frankly, when you're trying to build a business from a napkin and trying to create it versus investing and you're piggybacking off of something that's already established. But I certainly spend a lot of time thinking about that because I definitely have still a lot of entrepreneurial juice left in me and things that I want to start.
Amazing. Dave, thank you so much for sharing all of this great information. Where can people go to grab the book and to connect with you online?
Best way is just go to my website. It's actually a play on my name. So it's lucrative, LIUCRATIVE.com. I got to give a shout out to my wife who came up with that name.
I love it.
But lucrative.com. You can go on there. You'll find links to my book there. You can find out all about me there. And then also, if you want to reach out to me, you can contact me through my website. I answer all my emails. So that's the best way to get to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me on your show today.